Hello. Today we will hear about the water energy food nexus in the Latin America Caribbean region, and especially with the focus on the Andes Mountains. And I'm here today with Líber Martín, a professor of the National University of Cuyo in Argentina, and Facundo Martín, also of the same university. They are longstanding collaborators of mine, and we have been focusing on activities related to the nexus. Let me display the slides and we'll get going with our talk. Professor Líber.
So thank you, Christopher, for introducing me, and hello to everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you some concepts about this very interesting approach of the nexus that we have been working in these regions since 3 or 4 years ago. So I would like to share with you first some facts, some findings, some conclusions, some ideas that we got when we work on that with the UN Economic Commission for for Latin America and the Caribbean, that we're working to studies trying to bring that nexus, the nexus approach, bring that to earth, to the ground. The main objective of this study was to identify priority interconnections in a kind of diagnosis. So this was the first study that you can get some article in English if you are interested in. And the second one focused on designing or developing policy guidelines. So I would like to first make a point regarding to the scant consideration that has so far been given to the water energy food nexus in Latin America and the Caribbean. The nexus has not been yet incorporated into the design of policies, plans, or management of natural resources for many reasons. The relative abundance of natural resources, coupled with restrictions on their underdeveloped status and focus on pressing short-term needs, have led to the nexus not being considered in intensive development models dependent on the exploitation of natural resources that have shown clear signs of environmental unsustainability and social inequality in the region. And these ideas are the general ideas that we find in this diagnosis. So in doing this work, so the second point I would like to make is the obstacles that we found in the way to identify these priority interconnections. We found some obstacles regarding, thank you for passing the slide, Professor Christopher. So we found some obstacles in doing that. First, because of the lack of information. As you probably know, when it comes to analyze interconnections between different resources, you need more detailed information, you need good quality of information, and this is not normally available in the region. You can get some general information or sectoral information, but not very detailed and from a not very good quality. Some states also don't share the information. So the second point, the second obstacle that we found was the great heterogeneity of the region. And this is maybe shared with your region. we have a very different countries with different climates, very different situations. So it's difficult to find priorities that works at the regional level, as we will see. And third, we in this region we have many countries with a very weak governance. So that means that it's difficult to take into account an approach such a nexus approach that need some very sophisticated elements as good information, power, institutional power, organization, planning, etc., etc. So the third point is related to trying to give you some examples of these interconnections, so these priorities for our region. The first case, as you can see in the slide, the water energy, it includes the hydropower first, that is very important for the region, even the largest scale hydropower. So many countries are very dependent on this source, and there is also a great potential to develop this source in the future. So, so taking into account the nexus approach is very important regarding hydropower. In the case of hydrocarbons and mining, also many countries like Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela, or even some countries in Central America are highly dependent on hydrocarbons and mining, where also the nexus approach can be useful to make it in a more sustainable way. The second interconnection, energy water, is also important for the region regarding groundwater extraction. First, in some very concrete regions as Central America or Mexico, or even in the desert or semi-desert areas of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, Mexico, and Peru, where groundwater extraction imply large amounts of energy, and because of that, the nexus approach is very interesting to improve this management. The desalination cases are not that much, so it's not for the moment very relevant. In the case of water food, this is really relevant for the region, for almost all countries. So it's a great field of opportunity to apply the nexus to improve the interconnection management regarding irrigated agriculture. And finally, the best example maybe of the nexus approach regarding biofuels, we have two big players in our region. There are basically Brazil and Argentina, where biofuels are really important. All other countries like Paraguay or Peru, Colombia, or some Central American countries as Costa Rica are also producing biofuels, and this is a really important point to make to try to apply a nexus approach. Okay, for finishing my very brief presentation, I will suggest to consider to compare in geographical terms the size and the dimension, the real dimension of the Himalayas in relation to the Andes. As you can show, as you can see in the slide, the Andes goes from very south of Argentina to the Caribbean to Colombia, and while the Himalayas goes from Pakistan, from Pakistan to China, but the Andes practically double the Himalayas. The Andes, as you can see, are very high length in the map. So I suggest to explore making comparison between these two mountain chains. So Facundo, if you want to continue, thank you.
So now I want to move in another scale. Now we are starting a research project collaborating with Professor Scott and also Professor Martin in the Rio Atuel River Basin. Please, Professor Scott, next slide, just to show you, before one, just to show you the location of the Atuel River Basin is in the central west side of Argentina, bordering with Chile, and it's a very interesting basin to test, to try to find these different nexus issues in an only one but very complex basin. It's a 485 kilometers basin, and it is also an interstate basin comprising not only the Mendoza provincial state, but also 1,000 other states. So it's an interstate basin which adds other complexities. It's a river depending on the snowpacks and the snow melting from the Andes. So it comes from a glacial lake, which name is the Atuel Lake. As Professor Martin said, we are in a desert place with an average precipitation that goes from 100 to 200 millimeters per year. Next slide, please. So 2 years ago, we conducted our first field trip to the site study. In this slide, in this photograph, you can see Professor Scott and Professor Líber Martín, me and other students and practitioners. We are working with this big stuff, trying to compare different basins along Argentina, but also other countries in Latin America. So in this case, we spent 3 days going from the very starting of the river to the lowlands. So let's go to some information on the cultural and historical background about the people that live in this basin. It is a region which has a mix of European and Asian immigrants coming from Spain, Italy, Japan, Poland, but also we have indigenous people that they call Huarpes and Mapuches. So this very, very intricate society has resulted in local communities with very durable agrarian cultures and values that is important to take in account when we are trying to apply this nexus approach. This basin, or the waters that comes from this basin, irrigate mostly agrarian lands, and the uses of the water is mainly for agrarian uses. Like as you can see in the first picture, it's a wine grape place, and in the other slide, in the other image, you can see the river, and we have also hydropower uses, as Professor Martin talked, and we have also to preserve some water to the south state of La Pampa. So the main use is for agrarian crops, and the kind of crops that we are growing there, it's like peaches, tomatoes, wine grapes, but also hydropower, as we said, and also to some cattle ranching. And more recently, the issue of tourism has been increasing in importance and as an economic activity. So we have here clear coming conflicts with these different uses between tourism and agrarian, more traditional uses.
Thank you very much, Professor Martín, and before that, Professor Facundo Martín. I would like to just end the presentation with reviewing some of the specific nexus elements that are found in the Rio Atuel Basin. On the left, you can see the cascade of reservoirs which are constructed to generate hydropower, but in the valley, there is also irrigation. And so the timing and the amount of water which is allocated for hydropower generation may have a trade-off associated with both irrigated agriculture, as shown in the last slides, but also there is rafting and kayaking, recreation, sport tourism, which is very important. Here in the figure, you can see these cascade of maps and several of the reservoirs which are being impacted by both the human demands for water, but also climate change and drought in this very sensitive region of the Andes. So the principal uses of water in the upstream are primarily for any kind of extensive use of land, some cattle, some tourism. And as one goes down, one finds these larger dams which are situated in the lower part of the basin. This is also where the irrigated agriculture component and these irrigated trees on the side of the road can be found, as well as some important towns and cities. Nothing on the population intensity scale of Asia. These are still smaller towns, but they're very important because that is where the economic lifeblood of the community in many cases lives. So people may have irrigated agricultural fields, but live in towns and cities. There's also a fracking, which is the extraction of underground gas in oil deposits. Mendoza province, where the two of them are based, has actually an important oil and gas sector. And now fracking is coming in, which is hydraulic fracking. And of course, this is the graffiti, which is in the city of Mendoza, calling fracking violence against the people. And so there's a lot of opposition to fracking on the part of many of the residents. Here you can see some of the pictures in the Mendoza, which is the upstream province, and downstream, the water is entirely dry. This is actually the riverbed, which means there's no more water which is left. And here are some scales to measure the water amount which is flowing. Of course, the irrigation infrastructure to take the water, and then a very large mass of people showing a protest to contest against this interstate water conflict. The conflict so far is being managed in a certain way through official channels. And also there are some legal court cases, including in the Argentine Supreme Court, which will give some findings on that. But I think the message is clear that Mendoza, which is the upstream, more prosperous province, will have to actually release some water to the downstream users in the next river basin. Here you can see one of the hydropower plants located in the valley of the Atuel Basin, and together with our field trip visit and also some of these recreational sites that we visited in 2018. Now, it's important to remember that the hydropower revenues are important for the state. It's not simply a private sector hydropower generation, though the electricity is sold ultimately to private end users, but the state has a very important revenue taxation mechanism for hydropower. So it's not only that it's generating a use value for the end users, but also the state is collecting revenue from that. So they're very interested to maintain this trade-off so that this would also be able to fund activities, not only for the state's general revenue and taxation mechanism, but also some of this adaptation and planning, which can come from those hydropower revenues. So one question is if these once dammed rivers now have to change their energy matrix to account for other sources of both demand for energy, which could be natural gas fracking, or can the existing energy matrix, which is the hydropower generation, be adequate to supply power, in this case electricity, for the various uses of electricity downstream? Keep in mind that these are very heavily impacted by climate change types of reservoirs. The photograph behind Professor Facundo shows a reservoir which has a very high level of increase in fluctuation in the storage, and this impacts both the downstream hydropower as well as the amount of water which can be released for hydropower. So we're very interested to look at this trade-off between irrigation for food production and the hydroelectricity in the upper part of the basin. These are some additional links that I have, especially with Professor Facundo Martín, with some colleagues on the other side of the mountains in Chile, just to the west. You can see here in this part of the map is Mendoza, Argentina, and on this side to the west near the Pacific Ocean is Chile on the other side of the Andes Mountains. But we have similar work which is going on in Peru. We have similar work that is going on actually in North America, not part of the Andes, but the Rocky Mountain chain, including some of the work in the Northern Rockies and Southern Rockies. But also it's very interesting on this hydropower question in Central America. Though the mountains are not as high, these are volcanic mountains that reach a maximum altitude almost of 4,000 meters above sea level, but in a very narrow isthmus of of east to west and very close to the Panama Canal. But these are also very important for some of those same nexus kinds of trade-offs. In terms of conclusions, it's important to mention that to succeed in a regional water, energy, food nexus approach, we must start from considering seriously those regional obstacles and specific characteristics that were mentioned by Professor Líber at the beginning of the talk. The water, energy, food nexus cannot be simply reduced, and we will come back to this later in the HUC online course, to only technical and efficiency aspects, including economic efficiency and technical efficiency, but more broadly, they must be linked to the social inequities and approaches for better social equity, as well as the environmental issues. So the planning can not only focus on the infrastructure and the profits made, but has to also account clearly for whose access and what are the environmental implications of that. And finally, the water, energy, food nexus approach constitutes an opportunity to change and update and revise the current unsustainable development model of the region, which is based primarily on extractive development and less on the reinvestment of resources and revenues that are made into social equity and environmental concerns, but also the process of climate and climate adaptation. With that, I wanted to thank you very much and indicate that we hope that in the process of my Mountain Chair Fellowship with ICIMAD, we are able to do some better networking between the Andes region and the Himalayan region. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.